Good evening. How we doing? Good. Wow, just the excitement is palpable. We are so pumped to be here. I'm super excited to have you guys here. So, guys, tonight we get to talk about women's health. Woo-hoo, right? Mother's Day, Mama's Month, collecting diapers this month. Got all sorts of good things going on with the practice. So, ideally, this is all for y'all. Um, Going through school and then getting married, and talking through those different processes, it became very apparent to me that, and us being a clinician for the last 10 years, it became very apparent to me that uh, I think women have been underserved and maybe a disservice in helping you guys to understand, like, how things work and what are the different environmental factors that impact your health and your well-being, and how like, mamas are like the cornerstones of our family, right? Like, everything revolves around mom. Moms make 90% of the healthcare decisions in the household. And I know in my family, if my missus, goes down, there's going to be fires and poop smeared on walls and blueberry handprints going up the staircase, which you would see if you came to our house. So we really love being able to feed into you guys and to help you to understand, hopefully, a little bit more about what's going on in the world, what's going on with you, and how we can all start to move the ball down the field and help us get healthy. Cool? Cool. Awesome. So this will be super boring if I have to talk to myself the whole time. So I'd really appreciate being able to chat with y'all. Okay. So up here on the left, these are my Ys. Okay. Fearless Frida in the upper left-hand corner. We were primary caregivers for her for the last 4 years of her life. She was a mother of 8 and had some really interesting chronic health challenges that I wish I understood better at that time, that I understand very well now. We could have done some really cool work for her. My sister, my mama, my lovely, beautiful wife, and my 3 little girls. So for all of you that don't know, we have 4 children. We have conceived and carried 7. So we definitely are working through the process of understanding all of these different factors that we're going to be teaching you guys tonight as well. Because we all go through different cycles and seasons, and we all just need a little bit of support and help from our friends from time to time. So you guys will have some handouts here in front of you. I'll dive into those here as we go through this process, but I've been given feedback in the past, like, Doc, you give us a ton of information, and sometimes it's too much for us to consume, and I don't have any notes to write things down. So if anybody wants to grab a clipboard and some paper and some pens, you're welcome to do so, okay? But ideally, hopefully this information blesses you, and we're going to go through the different stages and seasons of life. However, what we talk about in stage 1 is going to be applied to stage 4 anyways, okay? Because it all kind of works together. Okay? So, guys, where does health begin? Kind of, maybe. Has anybody ever heard of genetics versus epigenetics? This was one of our advanced topics in February. So we talked about genetics versus epigenetics. Who here was told that like all of your health outcomes are directly related to your genome, to what mom and dad gave you? Well, it was a commonly held paradigm for like the last 60 years. So it's good that you guys are shaking your head. No. Uh, yeah, I know, right? Most people have. It's like, hey, your genetics are your genetics are your genetics, which is true. Like, you are only coded for so many things. Now, the coding can change its expression. It can turn on or it can turn off. So, example, women, they have typically something inside them called a BRCA gene, breast cancer gene, right? The BRCA gene is actually a tumor suppression gene, okay? If that gene is expressed, the likelihood that you incur breast cancer goes down by 50%. However, we're all going through these different processes that we understand now called methylation and histone modification, which is something we dove super deep in February. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a surface level here today. If you want to go back and watch that one, you're welcome to do so. But basically, a methyl group, we have our DNA structure and it connects to a certain part of the DNA and it shuts it off. Okay, so if you have a BRCA gene that is designed to suppress the incidence of breast cancer and you methylate it, you turn the mechanism of that gene off. And so the probability that you get breast cancer goes up by 50%. Okay, so we're all going through these processes of methylation and what's called histone modification. If you really want to start to understand what's going on in health in the world, these are really important topics to wrap your brains around. Okay, so DNA methylation is happening to all of us. Has anybody heard of the MTHFR gene mutation? That's a methylation issue. Okay, has anybody ever heard of folic acid or folate. Yeah. Okay. So some of these different formulations are more easily available, readily available and digestible and usable for our body if they have methyl in front of the word. So a lot of the times when I look at people's supplementation, it'll say something like folic acid. They're like, well, my doctor told me to take more folic acid because it helps with spina bifida and babies and other stuff. It's like, yes, and the formulation of folic acid should say something like methylfolate something. So it needs to say methyl in front of it in order for your body to do something with it, okay? So this is a common thing that we talk about with supplemental reviews. But DNA methylation is a really important topic for you to understand because it's essential for processes like cellular differentiation, meaning repairing tissue and growing humans, okay? Hormone signaling, immune regulation, reproductive function, literally like every function in the body, okay? So cool real world example. What they did is there was this really cool population study that they did after World War II where the Nazis invaded the Netherlands. And so over that period of time, there was severe caloric restriction for like 99% of the population and gross over caloric consumption for the 1%ers, okay? And so then they followed basically what happened to the people that were alive at that time, their offspring and their offspring's offspring. And so what they were trying to figure out is like, okay, is it genetics or was it the environment that influenced the trajectory of these people's lives? And so unfortunately, 22,000 people died at that point in time. The majority of them were on calorically restricted diets of like 400 to 800 calories a day. But in the early 2000s, people started to study this population group. And so when they studied this population group, they found different genetic expressions, different methylation, different histone modification, messing with these people's DNA. And so what they found is that people that were severely calorically restricted at that time, people who conceived that were severely calorically restricted, had altered DNA methylation pathways that presented for the next 60 years of the study. So we were told that genetics play a big role in our health factors. That is somewhat true, but the environment, the lifestyle choices, and what happens to us, what we engage in, how we eat, how we move, ultimately influences the expression of that DNA and then what is therefore then passed to our children. As survival mechanisms of us being able to survive in this environment, our body's in a constant state of adaptation. It's constantly adapting to the world around us, right? And so we want to pass those survival adaptive mechanisms to our offspring, okay? But what happens if some of those survival mechanisms really aren't good for long-term health and well-being? Okay? Individuals that have that were severely had severe increase in caloric consumption had their offspring and their offspring's offspring had increased incidences of obesity, type 2 diabetics, cardiovascular disease, infertilities, and schizophrenias. People that were severely calorically restricted had severely altered birth weights and metabolic dysfunctions. And this was, again, passed on for multiple generations. They'd done some really cool animal studies on this too. Well, they're kind of sad and morbid, but they're kind of cool too. So they did this one study where they took a mama mouse, and every time she drank water, they electrocuted her. And then they mapped the stress response in her brain, and they mapped her DNA. And then they bred her. And 14 generations down the line, even with no like noxious stimulus, no electricity, anytime her offspring went to drink water, they had the same response in their body. Kind of crazy, right? So where does health begin? I mean, kind of what happened, the 14 generations prior to us being here is influencing how our body's interacting with the environment now. But you don't have a whole lot of control over that, right? What you do have control over is what? Yourself and the choices you make every single day and how we are interacting with the world now. Because the cool part about this whole process, guys, is that your epigenetic factors can change based upon your choices. And so we can truly start to, if we understand this, if we take this very seriously, we can start to break transgenerational patterns of sickness and illness and disease. And we can set the future generations up for better health and well-being, which is pretty cool if you're super interested in like leaving legacy. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, guys, about genetics versus epigenetics. So what we do prior to conception is incredibly important in setting the success of that baby up for interacting with the world in this environment. So food for thought. Who do you need to know? or who do you know that needs to hear this before they actually start their own family? Right? Is it really easy to convince an 18-year-old to start to take better care of themselves? No. The answer is no. No, it is not. I kind of didn't get to that point in time in life until I was like, I don't know, probably like 23, 24, 25, where I was like, hey, time to be a grown up. Luckily, my wife had a big hand in that because I asked her to date me like 4 times. She kept saying no. And then finally, I matured and grew up enough where she's like, yeah, I'll date you now. I was like, cool, awesome. And the rest is history. But if we want our children to be viable in this environment, when do we need to start working on our health to break these transgenerational patterns? And ideally, now is the best time. But if we can really start to help and guide children through these processes and help them to build wonderful health practices, then by the time they're ready to start their own families, we can really start to kind of change the trajectory of chronic disease burden in our country. How's chronic disease burden look in our country, guys? Is it good, bad, or ugly? That's not great, right? We have one of the highest chronic disease rates of any industrialized nation. Less than 50% of our children, or actually more, about 50% of our children, RFK just said this the other day, but about 50 to 54% of our children have one of 20 chronic health conditions, which is crazy, right? More than 50% of our children are chronically ill. So what we have control over, guys, is our individual choices and our lifestyle. And there's some big systems, excuse me, at play. Apologize. That ultimately, they all work together and they all influence how we interact with the world. The number one system in your body that controls, coordinates, and adapts to everything is your... Nice. April, go. Nervous system. Nice job. You're neurology. Okay, but the neurology, your brain is dependent upon biochemistry as well. So what we eat, what we're feeding into our system is ultimately going to influence our expression, our health, and our well-being. Something I really want you guys to understand is this pathway towards disease, okay? The body is constantly being inundated with stressors, right? Gravity, pressure systems, phases of the moon, parasites, toxins, right? The body is constantly under burden and demand. So we cannot take a position of fear avoidance when it comes to health. We have to take a position of resiliency and adaptation. We have to do things for ourselves to increase our performance and adaptability to the point where no matter what life throws at us, we can handle it pretty well. Because what happens when your body's in a state of stress? It starts to produce an chemical reaction. Hormones change, cortisol levels go up, inflammation drives up, right? So acute inflammation is very, very good for the body. You need to have acute inflammatory responses to be healthy. Think of a fever, right? If somebody came up with the flu and sneezed in your face, Trina, you'd probably want to spike a fever, which indicates and signals that your immune system is now active in fighting off the infection at a very metabolically active rate. However, what if our inflammatory signals don't turn off? We're chronically inflamed all the time. That's going to make us what? Eventually, right? So a good way to think about this is, let's take a chemical stressor. I am a sucker for key lime pie. It's awesome. Okay, it's great. Go to Florida, oysters, key lime pie, so good. But if I chose to eat an entire key lime pie every day for 10 years, that's a lot of chemical stress, right? That would produce a lot of chemical inflammation, and I would end up with what kinds of diseases? Diabetes, heart disease, cancers, strokes. Guess what are the leading causes of death in the United States, guys? Heart disease, cancer, stroke, antibiotic-resistant infections, right? So this pathway of disease burden can be extrapolated basically over all of our choices: stress, inflammation, and disease. But if these systems are performing the way they're supposed to, they should be able to handle and adapt to these different stressors. Now, they're all separate, but they're all working together simultaneously. So at this point in time, what we have control over, rather than our epigenetic factors, which we need to have an understanding of, so that way we can either course correct from some things that were gifted to us that we really don't want. But what we have direct control over now is our lifestyle, our choices, what stressors are being applied to our body, and how our body is going to handle and adapt to those stressors, which is all run through your neurology and your nervous system. The nervous system is surrounded and encased in bone by the spinal column. It's designed that way because it's a really important system and it needs to be protected. So the spine and the nervous system have a very intimate relationship. spine's all crappy and dysfunctional. It messes with communication to the brain. The brain gets super disorganized, and then the output or the effect it drives over the body is also bad, right? Inaccurate in nature. And if that happens for minutes, hours, days, months, years, then you'll end up eventually in a state of dysfunction and disease, right? Which is why we're all here caring for our spines and our brains, because it allows us to have a better expression of health and life. So as we enter the first season of life, menarche, this is prior to or the start of menses. So I kind of skipped over pediatric neurodevelopment as we covered that on a different topic, and we could be here all day talking about all sorts of fun things. So menarche phase is a girl's first menstrual cycle, pivotal milestone in female development, representing biological transition into reproductive capacity. The timing and health of menarche are influenced by a variety of biological, environmental, and psychosocial factors. Okay? Ladies, when you're stressed, does being chronically stressed help your reproductive cycle? Nah, right? We're going to talk about cortisol here in a second. So, some of this stuff can be super fancy, but we can really distill it down to make it very, very simple. Nutritional status and body fat percentages. Men and women are different, right? Women are meant to have more biologically. You need it to regulate your hormones, which I know is not awesome for the cover of Women's Health, but it is really important to your hormones and your fertility. So in order to even induce your menstrual cycle, you have to have a minimum of 17% body fat and 22% to sustain regular ovulatory cycles. So if we drop that super low or we move it super, super high, the further we will move away from that standard deviation of, ideal, the more disruption we're going to have, okay? But women are meant to have a little bit more body fat, and you'll understand why here in just a second, because body fat has a hormone, the cellular signaling response called leptin, that has a dramatic impact on influence on estrogen levels, okay? So undernutrition or low BMI, somebody who is super calorically restricted, let's say maybe somebody who suffers with like anorexia or bulimia, which is, super common. Body dysmorphia is a really significant thing. They're going to have delayed onset of menarche. While overnutrition, so childhood obesity, is linked to early onset of menarche. Your reproductive cycles and insulin are so dramatically intertwined. So if we have a high insulin resistance or an insulin sensitivity, it's going to create a significant impact on fertility, uterine lining, and hormones. So early menarche, if we do induce early menarche or early menses because we have childhood obesities, which our country is known for, okay, then we're going to have severe risk factors for things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, breast cancers, and metabolic diseases, as well as endometriosis. Okay. Glycemic control and insulin resistance are a key player in the timing of this process, as well as this isn't just the start of menstrual cycles. This applies to you throughout the entirety of your life cycle. High glycemic diets like enriched carbohydrates, enriched with folic acid, which is nothing for you, and your body can't absorb it. It's actually caustic to you. And sugars lead to frequent blood sugar spikes and chronic insulin elevation. Insulin is not just a metabolic hormone, but it will stimulate the ovaries and androgen production and suppresses sex hormone binding globulin, which accelerates estrogen signaling. Okay? Early onset of puberty in menarche, especially in girls with high central adiposity, so a lot of abdominal fat. Insulin resistance in early menarche. Studies show that elevated insulin and insulin resistance can lead to early onset, more irregulated menstrual cycles after the onset of your initial menses, and increased risk of, again, PCOS, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic syndrome later in life. Because leptin, which is a hormone produced by fat cells, interacts with insulin and signals to your hypothalamus, which is up here in your brain. Guess what other really cool health practice influences your hypothalamus? Yeah, way to go, Ruth. Nice job. Very good. Okay. The hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis, because everything that happens in your body starts in the hypothalamus. It's your grand central station. All data from the world has to go through here and be organized, and then the effect or the response is driven over the body. Okay. Research shows us that chiropractic care, healthy spinal structure, and cervical curvatures of greater than 20 degrees improve the organization and efficiency of your the term N30, which is your hypothalamus basal ganglia, hypothalamus, thalamus, and basal ganglia. Really, really important central conducting centers of the central nervous system. So poor glycemic control, disrupted leptin signaling, resulting in hormonal imbalances. So if we have a glycemic imbalance, meaning high insulin secretion, which eventually will lead to insulin resistance and sensitivity, is going to trigger early puberty, and then extreme restriction is going to delay it. And if we have high insulin, we're most likely going to have those other issues as well. Genetic and epigenetic programming. There is associations to when your menses starts based upon what mom and grandma and great-grandma went through. But it is directly correlated also to various environmental cues like stress, chemical exposures, which can modify those gene expressions, just like we talked about with the methylation and the histone modification. Okay? There are a crazy amount of chemicals allowed in our food supply and in our products that dramatically disrupt the endocrine system and hormones. And a lot of them are things that we use like every single day. Laundry detergents, what's the thing that we put in the dryer sheets, like the things like fragrances, perfumes, phthalates, BPA, they all will typically they're all phytoestrogens, and they're all a synthetic form of estrogen, and so they drive estrogen levels really, really high. And the balance of our hormonal cycle needs estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone in different ratios at different times of the month in order to have normal ovulation and be able to conceive. So early life exposure to these guys, even in utero, will accelerate hormonal dysfunction. You guys know they just published a study on this. It's a landmark study published by the EWG. Do you know on average, how many carcinogenic and hormone disrupting chemicals are found in fetal cord blood? Any guesses? 150? Going once, going twice. What else? Any other guesses? About 280. Yeah. So these are things that we, in our family, reflectively look at, especially when we go through a miscarriage. It's like, okay, we're designed to do this. Why did it not work the way that it was supposed to? What was disrupting and influencing that process? Okay. BPA, which is one of the big dogs, most pervasive, xenoestrogens, a synthetic chemical that mimics estrogen in the body and even in small doses disrupts endocrine function, impairing fertility, promoting estrogen dominance. If you have a high estrogen dominance, you may be able to conceive, but you cannot carry. Okay, you may be able to conceive, but most likely we will see miscarriages between like 8 and 16 weeks. Increases breast cancer, PCOS, and metabolic syndromes. The primary carriers of BPA, canned food and beverages, including like all of your sports drinks, all of your soft drinks, all of your energy drinks, all of your canned soups, all of it, unless it says BPA free, which even then it's like, it just means it's under the measurable level, which is who's measuring it and who's holding the standard is up for debate, right? Plastic food storage containers, especially if they put hot things inside them. So for example, like takeout food, if you put hot food inside of a plastic container, it's going to make this process really, really bad. Or if we heat up food in a microwave in a plastic container, also not ideal. Okay, baby bottles and sippy cups. Kind of surprising, but a lot of baby bottles and sippy cups are made of plastic. Yes, there's been a large push and shift towards glass and silicone-based products because they don't have this same response. Thermal paper receipts. Receipt paper. Do you know if you hold receipt paper for 10 seconds, it actually causes some really crazy things to happen in your body? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yep. We're actually walking out of Costco the other day, and the lady who puts the smiley face on everything was like, put the smiley face on it. My daughter was like, hey, can I hold that? And I was like, sorry, sweetheart. No. And the lady looked at me like I was a bad dad. She's like, what? Like, why would you let her have it? I'm like, because I will lay on this grenade for my child and not put those hormone disrupting chemicals in their body. Plastic utensils, paper plates and paper cups, okay? But basically all plastics. And plastics are literally in everything, including your clothes. So psychosocial factors in family environment, high levels of early life stress, including absentee parents, family conflict, sexual trauma, which unfortunately statistically is 1 in 5 women. Baffling to me. Psychosocial acceleration theory, again, high levels of stress via what's called your HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary to adrenals, ramp up your cortisol levels. So we already talked about this. What health practice dramatically influences your brain's ability to regulate your HPA axis? You're here, you're doing it. Woo-woo. Chiropractic care, okay? Specific kinds of chiropractic care. Okay, cortisol is the master disruptor of the menstrual cycle. You know, guys, we're all kind of super stressed all the time. At least, I don't know about you, but I feel that. So we need to develop some really good strategies to help our body to adapt to these stressors more effectively. Okay, chronically high cortisol suppresses the hypothalamic release of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. So GnRH. Your gonads, ladies, are your ovaries. Good. So if we do not have a gonadotropin-releasing hormone, guess what isn't telling your ovaries to do something? So in order to get your ovaries to work, you actually need your hypothalamus to work, which is kind of a problem a little bit with like birth controls and hormone replacement therapies, because commonly, especially if somebody has like a thyroid condition, they're like, you have low T3. It's like, okay, so let's inject you or give you a medication with synthetic T3 to increase the levels in your blood serum, which means floating around your bloodstream. That does not mean what actually gets inside the cell. So there's a different way to test to see what's actually in your blood chemistry versus what's actually getting inside the cell to make biology happen, to make life happen. And one of those tests is included on your handout, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Okay. So if we do not have gonadotropin releasing hormone, this reduces luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone. In your menstrual cycles, ladies, you have a follicular phase and a luteal phase. And this is how your body works and how babies are made. Women are built on a 28 to 31, 32 day hormonal cycle. Men are on 24-hour cycles. Okay, so our bodies are a little different, right? Estrogen, high estrogen specifically, does sensitize cortisol receptors. So if you are in a high estrogen dominant state, your body also wants more or is more sensitive to the release of cortisol. It's a negative feedback loop. So if we have high one, we're going to get high other, and then it's going to continue to stimulate each other, and then we don't break the cycle. Okay? Low estrogen from high chronic stress eventually will deplete that process and will be running on low. Will cause poor follicular development, mood swings, dryness, and low libido. Okay? Cortisol competes for the same binding site as progesterone does. So if you have high cortisol, that's why typically high cortisol, high estrogen, and then we can't get to the progesterone phase, which is where, again, we continue to carry, or when we continue to conceive and then carry past a longer duration of time. Low progesterone means a short luteal phase, menopausal type, menstrual type symptoms, spotting before periods, anxieties, and sleep disorders ensued. If you have cortisol, your body will produce more leptin, because when you're stressed, your body wants to store more fat because it's necessary for survival, right? Which is why if we're super chronically cortisoled up, it's really hard to lose weight, right? It's really hard to change our body composition. So because now when a high stress state, your brain's recognizing the world as a stress-inducing event, and in order to survive for long durations of time, I need the most long-lasting bioavailable food source I can get, which is fat. Yep. So high cortisol disrupts leptin sensitivity, meaning we have to produce more of it to cause a response, okay? Leptin, again, is part of fat storage and is released from fat cells. And so if we become less sensitive to it, it means we need a higher threshold, a higher level of it before our body starts to recognize the process. Does this make sense to you guys? Sweet. Cool. Which also, if we distort leptin with high cortisol, It'll disrupt our cycle. It'll cause amenorrheas and delayed puberty in adolescence. Testosterone is also a really important part of your process, especially as you are ovulating, as it increases libido. But if we have high cortisol, testosterone typically goes down. So if we have elevated levels of cortisol, we're going to suppress our releasing hormones. We're going to suppress progesterone. We're going to cause estrogen dysregulation. Initially, it's going to go up, but then it's going to be depleted. We're going to be more resistant to leptin, and then testosterone typically is also going down. So guys, if I put you in a burning building, do you want to make the time to make a baby? Nope. That's basically what this sums up to, okay? Chronic stress does not allow for the appropriate production and regulation of your fertility as well as your cycles. Sleep plays a massive role in our hormone populations and in quantity of those. So melatonin is an amazing precursor and has all sorts of cool correlations to cancer rates and all sorts of crazy stuff. Melatonin, though, is made where? In your nice job. And it starts to be stimulated to make it based upon the frequency or the wavelength of light coming from the sun. So as the sun starts to go down, our body naturally starts to produce melatonin. Guess what disrupts that process? Artificial. Yep, sorry. We should all be wearing blue light filters past sundown. Blue light past sundown is classified as a 2A carcinogen. Because of its impact on melatonin production, secretion, and melatonin's impact on cancer. There's a really cool doc up in Kentucky. He's a functional doc. He specializes in cancer, specifically pediatric cancer, and he solves it outside of traditional methods. And one of the big ways that he does that is through appropriate melatonin production and supplementation. So his recommendation is you should be supplementing roughly your age in melatonin a day, which I know is a lot. But I mean, some people are super sensitive, so you may want to start a little lower than that and see how your body responds. Okay. So if your children are staying up past 10 p.m., wildly disrupts their hormonal regulation. And then if we're up past 10 p.m. and utilizing blue light, which is all of us all the time, it is greatly impacting their hormonal regulation. Okay. So how do we support this process and this development into a healthy hormonal cycle? Well, number one, we have to ideally have a really nice birth, labor, and delivery, vaginal processes, good transference of the microbiome, breastfed baby, getting all the good hormone profile and immunoglobulin profiles from mama. But as we go through those developmental seasons, whole foods, low glycemic meals, healthy fats, clean proteins, fiber, fruits, vegetables, seeds, and nuts. Reduce intake of refined grains, sugary drinks, and processed snacks. Be conscientious of your environmental toxins. Encourage movement and exercise because there's no lack of evidence showing that exercise, bone density, and muscle mass is dramatic drivers of your hormones. Reduce toxic burden like shampoos, hygiene products, fragrances. Regulate your stress response, chiropractic care. Woo-hoo. And then blue light exposure after sundown or a minimum, wear blue light blocking glasses. And guess what? Does this apply just to this phase of life? Nope. So, spoiler alert, you're going to hear similar information moving forward. Okay. Top hormone disrupting toxins common in feminine products, specifically deodorants and antiperspirants. I used to use, what's the blue one growing up? Stained all my shirts blue. Old Spice. Yeah. And wish I wouldn't have done that because that makes a whole lot of sense of why X, Y, and Z happened in my body. But one of the best deodorants that I'm aware of now, it is more expensive, but it lasts a really long time. Like I buy deodorant like once every 4 to 6 months. And it is hands down the best deodorant I've ever used as a stinky man. It's called, yeah, I do wear it. Oh, all over the place? 4 to 6 months. Oh, yeah. Okay, if you only wear it every yeah, we'll apply once every 4 to 6 months. No, it lasts for like 4 to 6 months. But it's a product called Primarily Pure. It is more expensive, but it's like an activated charcoal, and it's very, very good at what it does. But most of our deodorants, guys, have high aluminums in them. Aluminums, heavy metal toxicities, heavy metals cross the blood-brain barrier. Heavy metals disrupt our lymphatic system. We are applying this product to where? Our axillary area. And what lives there, ladies? Lymph nodes, which influence which tissue? Very good. Nice job. Have you guys read the book Dressed to Kill? I would encourage you to check it out. It's a super interesting book about how cultures that don't wear bras have dramatically reduced incidences of breast cancer because of the compression applied to the lymphatic system and the lack of drainage to the breast tissue. It's super interesting read. Highly encourage you to check it out. Actually, by a medical doctor who went and studied populations over in Africa and other countries and like presented this information to the United Nations, and they're like, we don't really care. Kind of crazy. So aluminum salts, aluminums, high aluminums in a lot of our common products like Dove, block sweat glands linked to estrogen receptor disruption, okay? Especially messes with the breast tissue. Parabens mimic estrogens. They are xenoestrogens. If you have not heard the term xenoestrogen or phytoestrogen, these are synthetic estrogens and they do not do very nice things to you, okay? Fragrance and perfume, often mix of hundreds of undiagnosed or undisclosed chemicals, including phthalates, which we know are known hormone disruptors. I knew nothing about any of this stuff until we started having kids, because my wife was like, we gotta get all this stuff out of our house, because if I spray this thing on me and I'm nursing my baby and they're breathing it in, I'm gonna get cancer. It's like, oh my gosh. I was like, well, good, like awesome. Thank you for helping us with this. But yeah, I really didn't know anything about this until we started popping out babies. My wife got extremely passionate about studying this and started using a makeup brand called Crunchy. If you guys are familiar with that, it's a fairly clean, non-toxic makeup brand. If you want to check it out, you're welcome to. It is like a multi-level marketing thing, but it is a very clean product. So if you want to check that out, you're welcome to do so. But that is, to my knowledge, like one of the best mineral-based.
First, I come back in June. There's another MLM.
Cool.
But they're pretty clean.
Nice.
EWG has a
list. Yeah.
so easy to use. So when you go to Target, you can.
Nice. Cool.
I wanted to jump in very quickly
Yeah.
on that. A couple of products that you can even try out at Ulta, the one in Lebanon. Yeah. There's one called Polite Society. It doesn't even have the silicone that is in Crunchy and a lot of other clean brands.
Cool.
So it's even missing those. That and Lawless is at Sephora here.
Beautiful.
Check those out. Those are super cool.
Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate you. I haven't shopped for makeup in a minute, so I thank you, Shannon, for that. Yeah. No. Been a minute. All right, guys. So biggest offenders in our shampoos and conditioners, SLS or sodium lauryl sulfate, which penetrates the skin. Your skin is highly absorbable. It is, I saw this really cool thing the other day where they put chlorine testing strips in water, and then they put their hand in water, and they took their hand out in like 3 seconds, and they retested it, and all the chlorine was gone out of the water. Crazy how fast our skin absorbs stuff. Okay? Phthalates found in fragrances disrupt testosterone estrogen balance. Parabens stored in body tissues interfere with your HPA axis and stress response, elevating cortisol levels, messing with your hormone production. Formaldehyde, preservatives, which is a known carcinogen. So makeups, foundations, and lipsticks. Primary offenders in lipsticks, lead, which I don't know about you, but I think we've talked about removing lead out of paint, but you are still painting your face with it. Talcum powders, which there was a massive class action lawsuit. Guess which product in the world contains the most amount of talc? Baby powders, yep, causing leukemias and lymphomas. Siloxanes interfere with reproductive hormones, and BHA and BHT disrupt androgens and thyroid signaling. So Ms. Mesh brought up a really, really wonderful tool, which is up here, and I think it's on your papers, but the EWG. If you are not familiar with them, I would encourage you to look them up, but they are a very environmentally conscious company that goes and tests everything and creates lists of which products are less detrimental, that influence DNA methylation and histone modification, because that's really what all this stuff does, is it suppresses our body's ability to fight and stop cancers and jacks up our hormones. Okay. Okie doke. Feminine washes, wipes, and sprays. And let's see here, long-term impacts on hormonal health. So chronic exposure to these compounds are linked to all sorts of crazy issues. So what can you guys do? Choose EWG verified products or made safe certified brands. Switch to organic or unbleached cotton tampons, pads, or what I'm seeing most prevalent in more holistic circles are menstrual cups. They seem to have the least amount of influence on your internal environment, ecosystem, flora, and rest of that process. Okay? Um, Ideally, avoid all products with any sort of fragrance in them and use mineral-based non-nano makeups like Crunchy or the two that Shannon referenced earlier. But on average, 287 industrial chemicals, pollutants, and pesticides were detected in umbilical cord blood of newborns. And a 2005 study by the EWG found that the average woman uses 12 products daily with a total of 168 unique chemicals. Most of them have never been tested for safety or long-term hormonal consequences. Actually, if you look at the package insert on section 13.1 of, this is total tangent, but that's what made me think of it. Section 13.1 of any VACCINE insert handout, it'll say something to the effect of, this product has never been tested for carcinogenic, mutagenic, or tetragenic effects. I would encourage you to read about that and look into that, okay? So stages of our menstrual cycle, ladies. Number one, menstruation, so the sloughing off or the bleeding of that internal uterine lining. Very low hormonal production at that time. Body temperature is relatively low. As we go through the follicular phase, you'll start to see an increase in estrogen. And then once we go through the follicular phase, so this growing follicle happens in the ovaries, and then it'll get released for ovulation through the uterine tube, hang out in here, wait for fertilization. If that process does not occur, then as we go through ovulation into luteal phase, we'll go back into sloughing off, okay? So it's really important that our body is allowed to go through this process because it dramatically influences your metabolic rate, your bone density, your muscle mass, your mental and emotional well-being. So when we alter or stop this process synthetically, so no matter what reason, but birth control was originally designed to control your ability to reproduce, which I think is a really interesting concept, that it's termed birth control, because is it giving you more control over your body, or is it giving you less control over your body? Depends on how you think about that question. But this is our normal cycle. Did you guys know that you have to eat different? Your caloric requirements, what your body needs to do its job, changes with each phase of your menstrual cycle. So we should be eating like higher protein on the front end and more cruciferous vegetables and fats on the back end in order to support this normal hormonal cycle. So we're not going to pay attention to this guy. What I'd like you to pay attention to is this guy over here. Okay, so menstrual phase, day 1 through 5. This is when we've just gone through that bleed process. We're iron deficient, so we need to be consuming more iron-rich type foods and a lot more folates, okay? Primary iron-rich foods are going to be your super red meats, your grass-fed, grass-finished red meats, your lentils, spinach, and pumpkin seeds. Do some cool things. Pumpkin seeds are also really, really helpful in killing off parasites and the larvae that live inside you as well. I feed my kids pumpkin seeds at least once a week. Vitamin C, please don't get ascorbic acid, though it has to be in a different formulation, but it does aid in the absorption of iron. So if you were to pair some bell peppers with like a grass-fed red meat, as long as your body can process the inflammatory aspects of bell peppers effectively, that would be a really good pairing. Anti-inflammatory spices like turmeric and ginger, hydrating foods like cucumber and bone broth. Again, bone broth is heavily rich with your branched chain amino acids, which will help with that iron absorption. And then magnesium, which comes from avocado, and everybody's favorite, dark chocolate. Dark chocolate needs to be what percentage for it to actually have benefit to you? 72, minimally, okay? So if you want to go 100%, go for it, but 72 is where you need to be at a minimum, okay? During our follicular phase, which is day 6 through 13, this is where we need to build, energize, and detox. So boost energy for mitochondrial function, because around this time, if you don't remember, this is where our follicular phase occurs, which is where the ovum is growing and getting ready to be fertilized. Whoops, wrong direction. So during that period of time, we need to support estrogen metabolism, because that estrogen spike occurs around this phase. And we need to ideally have follicular stimulating hormone in order to present that ovum into the fallopian tube where that everything happens. Okay? So in order to help with this, we're switching over more lean proteins like your salmons and your chickens. We want to work on our hormones or our microbiome through fermented foods because your vaginal flora and your vaginal pH is highly acidic typically, but the pH of your vaginal canal changes during fertility and ovulation. And because if we were to try and make a baby in an acidic environment, the sperm dies. Versus if we change the pH of the internal vaginal canal, it changes the mucosal lining, and it actually creates like little highways for the sperm to run up, and it makes it easier for conception. Because we're going to be getting ready for next phase, we need to actually increase our carbohydrate intake during this period of time, which we want to do typically through berries, things like sweet potatoes, yams. Also, wild yam complex is incredibly impactful for estrogen and progesterone regulation. And then B vitamins. When we have our B vitamins, we need them to be methylated B vitamins, but your whole foods, that's where that's going to come from. But if you're more into supplementation, just make sure whatever the B vitamin says, it says methyl in front of it. Okay? Harder to find those. They're usually a little bit more expensive. And then we go through our ovulatory phase, which is a short window of time. When we look at the breakdown of the month, I just had this conversation with my son the other day because he's starting to ask questions about this. He's like, wait, so girls can only get pregnant like a couple days? Yes, it's not the entire, it's not open season all the time. Best nutritional strategies for this is we want to increase zinc-rich foods, which again are going to be your pumpkin seeds, your oysters. Also, zinc and selenium are very rich in Brazil nuts as well. So if you guys like Brazil nuts or can find them, they used to have some organic ones at Costco. I haven't seen them in like 6 months. So if you guys find some, let me know because I'd love to get some. Vitamin B6 and folate, methyl folate come from your dark leafy greens and your beans, antioxidants, berries, beets, citrus, and then our healthy fats again, avocado, olive, and walnuts. Black walnut husks are also incredibly impactful at killing off parasites. Okay, best time for high performance meals, think power salad, smoothies, and grains. Luteal phase, metabolic requirements change a little bit. We want to be looking more at our high fat type products. And so like our salmon, flax, chia, sardines, but high EPA, DHEA are really, really good fats to support this process. And then ideally start to support the liver because the liver stores a lot of byproduct and is our primary detoxifier. So the liver is primarily supported very well with nettles and dandelion root. So if you guys want to pick up some dandelion and dandelion root tea, day 17 to 28 of your cycle, that is when that would be wise to consume. Have you guys heard of seed cycling? Nope. This is a very ancient practice that is now becoming more popular again. And it's a really good way to influence this hormonal cycle. Eating certain seeds at certain times of your cycle influence progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen levels. Now because of agricultural practices in the world being done, we want to be careful what seeds we are consuming. So kind of stay away from like your Planters peanuts and your cashews and sometimes your almonds. You want to stick more with your walnuts, Brazil nuts. I'm missing one. Okay, higher in carbohydrates than protein. Different nuts have different macro breakdowns too, where some are higher in protein, lower in carbs, and some are higher in carbs and lower in protein. So like the most common commercialized ones are typically much more higher in refined and simple carbohydrates than they are in protein. So seed cycling is a cool food-based way, and I would encourage you to read about this because this isn't one size fits all. But ideally in the first 14 days of cycle, the follicular phase, consuming more flax and pumpkin type seeds helps with the estrogen increase. Okay? Pumpkin seeds are also helpful to increase zinc. And my opinion would be like day 10 through day 20 would be a good switch to Brazil nuts as well. When we enter the luteal phase, 15 to 28, we want to be more on our thinking a little bit more towards like our soy-based products, so like the sesame and the sunflower seeds. I did include in your handout in front of you information on seed cycling, so I would encourage you guys to read through that. And usually this won't make a significant impact for you first cycle. But as you build the practice and you are disciplined in this practice, usually by cycle 2, cycle 3, you will start to see better self-regulation. Okay. Also, less cramping. Okay. So things to consider on current practices: birth control, which is not, in my opinion, super honoring to your body and the rhythms and the cycles in which it was designed to go through for health and well-being. And we know that long-term, even short-term birth control usage dramatically increases the probability of cardiovascular events, depression, and cancers. So what's the actual risk? Blood clots, 2 per every 10,000 women per year. You guys know how many women on average are taking birth control? In the millions, yes. And it's commonly used for various off-label usages, like, hey, we'll take the synthetic estrogen and put it into your system so that way we can regulate your cycle. Or, hey, you have bad acne. Let's put you on birth control to help regulate your acne. Your skin is an absorption and excretory organ. What is acne? Your body trying to get rid of what? Toxic stuff, waste, and a crappy microbiome. So if we worked more internally on stress management, gut health, and health practices, we would have less skin irritations and reflections of that. Okay. If we combine oral contraceptives, the risk increases by 3 to 6 times. So that's a very high incidence of deep vein thromboses, blood clots, and with the data coming out on all the COVID stuff and the vaccination there and the increased risks of blood clots and cardiovascular disease. And if you have not heard this in America, it's being very publicized and talked about in places like France and Germany, where they're doing massive population studies and reviewing the data in the literature. But if you combine those things together, then we're really in a world of hurt. Increases stroke and myocardial infarction, so 1 in 5 per every 100,000 individuals per year. Oral contraceptives, 2 to 20 per 100,000 per year, so a 2 to 4x increase. And these are the leading causes of death in our country. So I don't know about you, but my thought would be, hey, let's not increase the probability of the leading cause of death, right? All right. And then mood disorders. In a 2016 large-scale Danish study following 1 million women, found that women on hormonal birth control, those individuals reported a 23% increase incidence of depressions, and teenagers had an 80% increase in incidences of depression on hormonal-based birth controls. So again, maybe not the best way to go about things, okay? Because birth control, when it talks about genetics and epigenetic factors, because we talked about this earlier, right? Like the choices we are making today and how it's influencing how chemicals and molecules are binding and interacting with our DNA. This stuff really hasn't been studied over generations and populations, right? Because how long has birth control been around? So do we have any long-term analysis or data to understand what this is going to do 2 to 3 generations down the line? No, but we can speculate, right? Are we seeing a wildly higher incidence of fertility issues in today's day and age than we did 50, 60 years ago? The answer is yes. So maybe there's a reason for it. So these changes, so when talking about hormonal contraceptives and the epigenetic implications, these changes can alter the function of reproductive tissues and persist even after discontinuation of the contraceptive. So for instance, studies have shown that exposure to synthetic sex hormones during critical developmental windows, like a growing female, can lead to lasting changes in gene expression patterns. For example, like estradiol, which is a synthetic estrogen commonly found in contraceptives, demonstrates increased risks of reproductive issues and cancers in subsequent populations. And this is what animal studies show us, because animals have shorter life cycles. So, we can breed a mouse 14 times in the time it takes us to study, and then we can extrapolate that over human populations. So guys, it's just like, hey man, maybe we could make different choices. Tampons are such a common product being used nowadays, and most of them are they're not organic, right? So it's a synthetic fiber, and it's usually doused with, what makes it white? Nice. Bleach kills what? Yes. And do you need bacterium, good, healthy microbiome bacteria, vaginal flora to make this system work? Yes, specifically your lactobacillus populations. Okay. So lactobacillus species, especially like these guys, so you can actually take vaginal pre and probiotics or suppositories to help repopulate that, but you can also primarily do it through food and what you're consuming and putting less toxic things in that area. So tampons absorb not just blood, but cervical mucus and protected vaginal fluids, altering the chemical balance. The presence of menstrual blood raises vaginal pH to a pH of 7.4. Your normal or baseline is 3.8 to 4.5. Is an acidic environment harder for an infection to grow in? Yes. Cool. All right. So when we have normal pH, we have better regulation of the population and species that are supposed to be there. Okay. Unfortunately, when we have tampons in place and the pH of the blood changes as a normal part of your cycle, it favors the growth of pathogenic bacteria. And some tampons contain bleaching agents and synthetic fibers that increase pH even further, especially if left in too long. This also disturbs the vaginal flora. Your vaginal canal is primarily anaerobic, not a whole lot of air, right? Not a whole lot of oxygen. We breathe through our mouth, not down there, right? So it needs to be anaerobic for the normal bacterial populations to be present and healthy. And these synthetic fibers can harbor external bacteria and also create, depends upon the fiber, but can create small tears in the vaginal lining. Repeated usage, especially with fragranced or bleached tampons, has been linked to dysbiosis, vaginosis, candida overgrowth, and various cancers. Most tampons are also filled with a toxin called dioxins, which is a bleaching agent and can accumulate in fatty tissues, which then influences leptin, which then influences estrogen. Okay. So while present in low amounts, chronic exposure, because we do this for 4 to 6 days out of the month, every month for a real long time, that would be quantified as chronic exposure, risks hormone sensitivity conditions. So alternatives or recommendations: organic tampons, ideally unbleached, or again, a big shift I'm seeing lately in certain circles is switch to actual menstrual cups. And the feedback that I'm seeing is actually fairly positive. Again, I do not have these body parts. I have not gone through this process. I do study it, and my initial specialty is in pediatric neurodevelopment and perinatal care. So I would leave that up to you, but here's the information. Okay. All right. So perimenopause, as we shift from summer reproductive years to autumn or perimenopausal years, perimenopause starts where? In your brain via your hypothalamus. Nice. Are you guys seeing a reoccurring thought here? Yes. So a really cool health practice that helps support your hypothalamus is, hey, very good. Okay. So it's not just your hormones, it's your brain's operating system. And it's going through a reboot, just like it did going through puberty, right? It's just the opposite side of the same coin. Okay. First changes typically occur in the hypothalamus and the pituitary because that's where all the stimulating hormones are released from. So the ovaries, in order for them to stop making what they need to make, you need to first stop telling them to make it, right? And so all your stimulating hormones come from the pituitary. So perimenopause is actually a neuroendocrine transition. It is going to lead us to, though, an increased cortisol sensitivity because we don't have the other hormones to then offset. Decreased serotonin and dopamine stability, and estrogen receptor changes in the brain. So mood swings, anxiety, insomnia, brain fog aren't just emotional, they're actually neurobiochemical. So since we know this process is going to occur, and it's a natural cycle and season of life, do you think the 30 to 40 years prior to that point in time facilitating healthy hormonal cycles are going to influence how well this season goes? The answer is yes. It's a cumulative effect over time. Okay. So, we already did that. Nice. Okay. So you can gain weight even without eating more because your mitochondria change. You become more insulin resistant, more sensitive to it, and you're prone to more fat storage because you don't have those big offsets and swings. We also typically have a harder time with regulating inflammatory load. So women need to actually change their nutritional profile, exercise, and recovery strategies and not just restrict caloric intake. So this is where we really want to maybe start to consider a transition to a very strict like carnivore, like Paleolithic type dietary profile, where we greatly reduce those refined sugars and simple carbohydrates. Okay? Let's see here. What's super honoring to this process, because as we're changing hormone profiles, we're going to start to mess with our muscle mass and our bone density, is one of the best physical activities, especially for, I mean, all of us to do, but really like middle-aged to transitioning into this perimenopausal season. One of the best exercises for you guys to do is what? Weightlifting, resistance training, putting those bones under heavy demand and load. And specifically, the amount of strength you have in your thighs and your glutes are directly correlated to your longevity. Have you guys ever heard of a farmer's carry? Nope. So it's where you pick up your body weight or the equivalent, or like, it basically depends on how much weight you can carry and how long you can walk it for. I forget what the measurement is, but I know men are supposed to be able to carry at a minimum 1.5, like their body weight, and be able to carry it for at least a minute in order to, and if you can't do that, your projection of longevity starts to really go down. I think women are 0.75 their body weight and still need to carry it for a very specific distance. Okay, but really the strength that you have in your quads and your glutes are going to directly correlate to your longevity and your well-being. In bone density, bones are built under load and demand. You show me a bone that's growing, it's one that has physical stress applied to it. The same is true of musculoskeletal breakdown. Why do we develop bony spurs? Why do we develop degenerative joint disease or arthropathies? It's bone that's under abnormal load, and it's been that way for a long time. If your neck bones, if the structure of your neck is not made in such a way that it can deal with load, right? What is that feedback mechanism going to create in the brain? What are your tissues going to be signaling to your brain? Help me. There's too much load here. I need you to help me. Okay. What is the most stable, resilient structure your body can build? Bone. So your body's going to lay down more bone in response to that cellular feedback mechanism. It's called Wolff's Law in anatomy. Okay. So you will lay down more bone as you place load on the bone. So if you want to prevent or reduce osteoporosis, you need to put your body under load, heavy load, okay? Which is why water aerobics for seniors, I mean, if you are so arthritic that you cannot move, it's a great thing, right? Because it's still going to keep you moving. And you can do some mild resistance in the water. But ideally, you should not be reducing the gravitational force on your body. You should be putting more load on your body to induce greater bone density and muscle mass. Okay. So really, like, the best time to do this is like 26 on. But if you can get into these strength training practices earlier on, it's good for you. But like, increasing that bone density, it only happens under load. So in order to help with this perimenopausal aging process, also the greater bone density and muscle mass you have, the better regulation of your hormones. Okay. All right. Hit that. Okay. So clinical lifestyle pros for the perimenopausal age and support process. We really need to start to focus on glycemic. Well, we should be focusing on glycemic management the whole time, but it becomes even more appropriate. Berberine is a really cool herb that helps you manage your glycemic index and spikes. Berberine is commonly used in conjunction with something called inositol for things like PCOS and insulin resistance and sensitivity driven endocrine dysfunctions. So those are two things that are usually paired very well together. Help support the liver, so that way we can clear out those excess hormones as well as any sort of fat storage, but glutathione is going to be a byproduct of that. And again, a great way to clean out the liver is going to be utilizing those nettles and those dandelions. Okay? Hormonal support, especially in this season, but really any time of life, adaptogens are really cool and helpful. Anybody heard of adaptogens before? It's a cool classification of plants God made, but basically you take them, you can't take too much. And the cool part is, if you're super upregulated, it brings you to baseline. If you're super downregulated, it brings you to baseline. It is an adaptogenic herb. If you are up, it'll bring you down. If you're down, it'll bring you up. Ashwagandha, holy basil, boswellia, rhodiola. There's all these cool plants out there that help regulate your HPA axis. Okay? Ashwagandha is one that I know my body responds really well to. Okay? This also applies to nervous system control, but magnesium, GABA, also, I'm not going to bring that up yet. Vagal nerve stimulation. You guys know what your vagus nerve is? It's cranial nerve 10. It's a nerve that comes directly from your brain, goes through a little hole in the bottom of the skull called the internal jugular foramen, front of the two bones in your spine, top of your spine, and goes all the way down to your reproductive organs, which is why, gentlemen, when we get kicked in the nether regions, we feel sick to our stomachs. Okay, your vagus nerve is it's its own classification of the nervous system. It's called the enteric nervous system. It literally, the nerve is so awesome and so big, it connects into literally everything. Have you guys ever heard of like diaphragmatic breathing, box breathing? Okay, because when you stimulate your diaphragm, you are stimulating or vibrating your vagus nerve, and your vagus nerve is vitally important and responsible for down-regulating those cortisol levels in that chronic stress response, which is why anybody in a panic attack or anybody dealing with high anxiety, they teach you to do what kind of exercises? Breathing exercises, because it's a short circuit or a biohack for your neurology. Other great ways to stimulate your vagus nerve, adjusted, is humming, singing, oming, chanting, or upper cervical input, aka get adjusted. All right, muscle and bone strength and mobility. You got to be doing strength training and supporting those nutritional needs to build tissue. It gets very hard for your body to build lean tissue after the age of 35. So it takes more effort to yield the benefit. And then mindset is always a big driver. I don't know about you guys, that's the biggest one for me. Can we agree that we can think ourselves into states of disease and illness? Yep. Anybody ever turn on the news and be like, man, the world's a great place? No. Most of the time we turn on the news and we're like freaking out about everything, right? And we're super stressed out about life. So if we show up in that state of mind and being, how are we supposed to socially engage? How are we supposed to connect? How are we supposed to be present with those that are in front of us, right? So all these practices really start here, making the decision, formulating your why, and understanding why you want to engage in these practices. To help bone resilience, vitamin D consumption and calcium consumption, not so much a fan of calcium, but vitamin D specifically. But here are the nutritional requirements or recommendations. For that perimenopausal state, you should be consuming roughly 1,000 milligrams a day. Postmenopause, 1,200 to 1,500 milligrams a day. However, the formulation of this is going to be very important to the actual absorption and utilization of your body. So you need to make sure it's formulated in a way that your body can actually use it. So for example, like vitamin D3, ideally it needs to be a liposomal version, or it needs to be synergistically bound with like a vitamin K in order for your body to actually absorb it and use it. Okay. Great food sources for this: sardines, leafy greens, sesame, almonds. My kids love sardines. Never anticipated that. Crack open a can of sardines and half an avocado. They're happy campers. Like, yeah. Really? I haven't had the pleasure. Protein requirements are going to go up, so that way we can diminish the process of muscle wasting, or what's called sarcopenia. Just means less tissue. Okay, so on average, we see a decline of 3 to 8% of that muscle mass per decade in that postmenopausal period. So ideal nutritional requirements for protein consumption, and this is not just for the perimenopausal state. This is really like all the time. But roughly 0.5 to, well, if you're not in this stage, I would say probably 0.5 to 0.75 grams per pound of ideal body weight. And protein is what females should be consuming in a day. Men should be somewhere between 0.75 and 1 per pound of ideal body weight. So if my ideal body weight's 185, that means I should be consuming roughly 150 to 180 grams of protein in a day. A 4-ounce chicken breast is roughly 30 grams of protein. That's a lot of math, guys. That's a lot of protein, isn't it? So we need to start to work towards these requirements, right? Okay, great sources for this. Again, depends on your own individual body, your sensitivities, what this stuff is being fed, because you are what you eat. Eggs, grass-fed meat, lentils, and collagen peptides. Okay. Omegas are incredibly important for the inflammatory process and cardiovascular support. Cardiovascular disease does dramatically increase as we get into that peri and postmenopausal state because of the impact on our hormones. We did a really cool advanced workshop on longevity of the cardiovascular system. So if you want to rewatch that, you're welcome to. EPA and DHA daily requirements are between 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams daily. You get these typically from your fish and from your flax. Okay? As in this phase, this does not apply to prior to this phase, but if you did want to start to look at how to manipulate or increase your estrogen supply, at this point in time, it would be potentially something to consider to increase like your soy-based products because they do increase your estrogens. Okay, that's also why for men, when they go to chronic veganism, we start to see some really potentially, if it's very not well managed, some really significant hormonal and lean tissue complications because it drives up estrogen and drops down testosterone. All right, increasing your magnesium intake will help with those sleep disturbances that we're going to be experiencing with the fluctuation of body temperature. Magnesium is important for all sorts of cool things, but it will help with sleep, mood, and metabolism. So will melatonin. And melatonin is going to be, again, ideally roughly around milligrams per year, roughly. I would encourage you to start with like 10 or 20 and see how your body responds. Okay? But food sources for this: pumpkin seeds, almonds, spinach, dark chocolate. Again, 72%. Woo woo. And then we got our B vitamins for brain and mood regulation, but they have to be methylated. Okay? Blood sugar stabilizers. If you sprinkle cinnamon on it, it will dramatically reduce the spike of blood sugar and the insulin demand. So cinnamon's a really cool, powerful spice and tool to help you to curb those glycemic indexes. For example, they did this really cool study where they evaluated children, energy levels, mood, behavior, blood chemistry. They fed one group of children oatmeal for breakfast. They fed the other one eggs and bacon, and they evaluated what happened over the next 5 hours. Want to guess what happened? What happened to the oatmeal group? Opposite. They had a high spike, and they were bottoming out their glycemic index within about 2 hours, and they start to see all sorts of interesting mood and behavioral issues, where the protein is much more long-lasting and satiating over a longer duration of time. Carbohydrates are much more bioavailable and quick nutritional sources because in a stress response, the body wants to give the brain a bunch of sugar, so that way we can have a lot of energy very, very quickly. Whereas protein and fat are more complex for the body to break down and utilize. It takes longer to utilize them as energy, and they're more long-lasting energy sources, which is why in a long-term starvation state, your body will want to store more fat. Okay? Which is also why heavy caloric restriction type diets are not awesome, and they don't work over the long run. Because if you're constantly signaling to your body that I am in a chronically caloric deficit state, and I'm starving myself, every time that I break my fast, I am going to be, depends on what you break your fast with, but I'm going to be more susceptible to storing more fat. Yep, cool. Okie doke. So cinnamon's a great way to do that. Okay. Here's our various adaptogens that help rewire that HPA axis. Again, ashwagandha, rhodiola, holy basil, very, very, very powerful herbs. Okay. Other phytoestrogenic herbs. Some of these could be used prior to this perimenopausal period, depends upon what your profile is, but most of these guys are specifically for improving estrogen response. Black cohosh, red clover, flaxseed. For sleep and nervous system, passion flower and chaste tree berry. Most of these things can come in teas. Teas are a very bioavailable way to get this into your body. If you want a higher potency, you want to shift or look for more of like your herbal tinctures. So if you need a big course correction, go with tinctures. If you want to use it more for a health practice, like on a daily or weekly cadence, teas. Cool? Very good. And guys, here's some really important testing that'll actually help you to identify some of these root causes, because a big problem that I see in our healthcare system is that most individuals base their perception of health like, hey, I went to my doctor, I had my routine physical, my blood work looked good. What are they looking at in your blood work? What blood work is being done? CBCs, CMPs. You guys know what those are? One's looking at like infection rates, and the other is looking at complete metabolic panel. But they're looking at your serum levels, what's in your blood. That doesn't, there's a really important process that has to occur to get it from your blood across the cell membrane into your cell to actually get it to be utilized. Okay? This is a really important process of how's our body actually absorbing what we're putting inside of it. And so if you're just basing your analysis on these basic levels, and the data on that, if you are abnormal, because these levels are based upon average population studies. What is the average population of the United States? And diseased, right? So do you want to fit within average normals of dead blood chem analysis? No, because then you're going to be super late to the game. By the time something does show up, you've probably been in a dysfunctional state for months to years. So these are the various testings that you need to request or you need to get, which are probably not covered by your insurance policies, in order to actually find out what's happening with your hormone profiles, what's happening with your micronutrients, your macronutrients, what's getting into the cell, what are your toxicities, what are your deficiencies. So these are like, if we could shift CBCs and CMPs to this profile, we'd all be doing a lot better. Or if these profiles were included in our general blood chem analysis, you guys would be doing a lot better. Lord, I hope so. But probably not until the insurance industry gets out of the way. Because they're for-profit. Yes, and they are for-profit companies, right? So that's why they don't pay for health care. They pay for... I hope so. I hope so. I don't know if it will. I think the momentum is there. I think hopefully frameworks will start to be built and things will start to shift. Yeah, maybe 20 years down the line. We'll see. Lord willing. All right, so the Dutch test. Dutch Complete test is a dried urine test for comprehensive hormones. This is a full spectrum hormone mapping as well as adrenal profile. It will measure your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, cortisol, leptin, all the things that we just talked about today. It also includes your organic acid markers, neurotransmitters, B12, and glutathione, so that way you can see what's the precursor, what's happening prior to this process, what's happening during, what's happening after. So you can look up and downstream, okay? If you go to most functional med doctors, this is like a basic panel that they run for all women's health. GI mapping. So DNA stool samples. This helps us to understand your gut microbiome, which is vitally important to the production of serotonin, as well as all of your other hormones. Immune response and estrogen metabolism. How's your body actually breaking down the estrogen that's then therefore available in the bloodstream? It also helps us to understand bacterium, parasites, candidas, and viruses. This helps us to screen for things like leaky gut syndrome, abnormal infections like H. pylori, and immune activations. How many people in the United States do you think are walking around with leaky gut issues? 100%. Not even for debate. 100%. Okay. Spectral Cell micronutrient panel. So Spectral Cell, these are different companies that run these different tests. But they help you to understand your intracellular nutrient testing. So what's actually getting inside the cell, because a lot of times with fertilities, we may have it good in our blood serum, but it's not actually making its way into the cell membrane to do what it's supposed to do. So this helps us to look inside the cell for vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, amino acids, and fatty acids. And then last one, or one of the last ones, organic acid tests. This is from Great Plains or Geneva Diagnostics. These are functional markers for detox, transmitters, gut dysbiosis, mitochondrial health. This will help you to understand a little bit more about how your body interacts with food in the environment, what nutritional profile or food sources are better for your individual anatomy and DNA. Now, these things do typically change in roughly 90-day to 6-month intervals as your epigenetic expression changes. As you start to understand the data and make shifts in life, your toxic load's going to go down, your methylation processes are going to go up, your sensitivities are going to change because the competence of your gut, your hormonal profiles, and your microbiome are going to ideally improve or fluctuate and vary. So these things are, is health a magical finish line we cross and we have it forever, or is it a constant state of dynamic change? Constant state of dynamic change, which is really frustrating for everyone to hear because it's like, I thought I was healthy. It's like, well, what are you basing your health on? How you feel or how you're functioning? Because feeling is a very, very small percentage of how your body works. Hair tissue mineral analysis will help you to understand mineral ratios, heavy metal toxicities, and adrenal patterns. I would encourage the majority of people to do this, especially if we have neurosensory children, children that are having a hard time with focus, attention, growth, development. We want to understand their heavy metal loads. And then methylation profile is a really, really important thing to do nowadays because this is going to directly influence your longevity, fertility, cancer incidences. This is also run by Geneva Diagnostics or Great Plains. Geneva Diagnostics and Great Plains. Which providers do them? My hope and goal is to do them for you one day. I have a few irons. I've never heard of these tests. Yes. I've never had a doctor do these tests. That's because they are not traditional tests that are covered under insurances. There's some really wonderful functional doctors in the area that'll help you with these, like Back to Basics, Rhonda Clark, Lisa Wynn, Vital Living, Andrea Weddle at Grace Wellness. Hopewell Family Care is amazing. Like, they are the 800-pound gorilla in our community. They are just a wonderful, wonderful institution. Dr. Jamie Arroyo there is a brilliant, beautiful brain. She's doing some amazing things for our community. My kids go there. Basically, everybody that I know goes there. They're so busy, though, that they're typically waitlisted like 6 months out all the time. But if you can get in there, they're a really great person to have on your team. And then a lot of functional med docs are down in Franklin as well, just because of demographics. Okay. So yes, you can find providers that do these. My hope and goal is to one day do these for you as part of our nurture healing framework of us, how we care for you and healing your brain and healing your gut and helping you to solve root causes of issues. We just got to the level where we're one of 3 offices in the state that provide true non-surgical spinal correction, so we can create lasting changes in spinal structure and brain performance. So the next layer or evolution of our practice is going to be diving a little bit deeper into these metabolic resources to help you guys to get to root causes as well, because that's what we're passionate about. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I want to continue to drive for you, to create a true family healthcare facility where we can address 95% of the issues people are dealing with. Okay? But not there yet. Hoping to get there in the next couple of years. So guys, in summary, a cumulative effect of a poorly managed lifestyle will dictate the quality of these different seasons of your life. And health starts when?
Actually, like 14
Yeah,
generations.
but we have control over what? Right now. Yep. And ideally, the best time to incorporate these practices is prior to the conception and the start of a family. So that way, because man, again, my first specialty is in pediatric neurodevelopment and perinatal care, and I hear all these birth stories and I see these different processes, and there's various trends and patterns that you see after hearing thousands of these consultations that you're like, if we would have just made this choice, we could have done this different, and set the baby up for this level of success. But that's not where we're at yet. So unfortunately, it's true of not only your choices, but the choices of your ancestors due to epigenetic expression. So you have a very profound responsibility now that you understand this process of what sort of legacy do you want to lead for yourself and your family. Because you can boil all this information down to some really basic health practices. And this is just a recurring theme in like all of our presentations, because no matter what health topic we dive into, it all gets kind of, after you weed through all the data, it's like, okay, well, what do we do about it? And it all comes down to just some really basic things that we all should be doing like every single day forever. Okay. And one, well, you don't need to get adjusted every day, but it's an important pivotal part of the health profile. It's a piece of the pie to help mitigate and improve that HPA axis. Again, everything that happens in your body from a hormonal standpoint happens or starts where? In your, very good. So exercise, specifically weight and resistance training, improves hormone regulation, stress management, improves sleep quality, bone mass, and lean tissue density. And we need to be loading those bones and those tissues to keep them healthy and strong and to maintain that muscle mass, because our body will just, through the process of glycation, we'll just start to, we all got to go meet Jesus sometime, right? So the body will break down eventually. But how that process occurs, the aging process, can be influenced dramatically through these different processes. Nutrition and supplementation, we can help you with this already. We have various protocols that we have already implemented and seen some really cool success with. So if you guys want to take this information and dive deeper, I had a lovely lady come to me today and she's like, hey, doc, it's a good probiotic you recommend. I'm like, hey, I could definitely make a recommendation for you, but actually what would be helpful for me is, can I get your most recent blood chem analysis? Here's a food diary and here's some questionnaires. Could you fill this stuff out for me and bring it back? No, that's too much. It's like, okay, no worries. Too much too soon. That's okay. Way too far down the rabbit hole for this individual. That's okay. It's like, I just want to start, putting some different things. Love that. Let's start that process. So I greatly value and appreciate when you guys come to us and you have that trust in us of like, hey, what's a good one of these? What's a good one of these? We don't have to overhaul the system. If you just want to start making little choices here and there, happy to help you with that because it's a momentum game. It's cumulative effect over time. Okay, sleep, got to rest, and ideally powering down around 9 to 10 o'clock and getting blue light out of your life at that period of time is vitally important to your melatonin production secretion, which is going to have a dramatic impact on your hormones and your cancer rates. And if you happen to want to do a late night movie or you're a doom scroller, please grab some blue light filter glasses so that way that stuff isn't hitting your cingulate gyrus, which is a part of your brain that's photoreceptive and then causes all sorts of interesting hormones to be created. Say that again. Red light filter. Red light. Like what comes off a fire. Screens. Like, just go to Amazon and type in red light filter screen or blue light filter screen, and you can find those. Yeah. Yep. So you can put different screens over the phone and block them out. Actually, I had the thought the other day. I was like, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we made a cell phone company that didn't have any blue light? I'm an idea person though. I need tactical. You need blue light filter. You need to filter out the blue light, and red light does not impact melatonin production and secretion. So there's also typically settings on your phones where you can turn that off at certain times of day. So you may want to look into the settings on your phone. Mm-hmm. So that's going to help other people not see your phone. That may not be the filter that you want to get the different wavelength of light out of there. So yeah. I don't like that light is too bright. Yeah, so you have a dimmer. You don't have a blue light filter. Yeah, so just give it a Google. Or if you want, I can send you some resources, okay? Okie doke. Just regular eyeglasses don't have blue light. Nope. Upsell. Maybe. I'm happy to invent new things, but I am not a discerner. I'm not good at putting pieces in place along the way. All right. Pray, meditate, guys. Everything starts in your perception and your thought processes. 90% of our thoughts in a day are cyclical. We make the same decision and the same choices over and over again to the point where they become subconscious and they run your life. So if we're not happy with the current state of things, the first thing that needs to change is how you speak to yourself, your thought process, what you listen to, what you watch, what you read. You need to physically reprogram your subconscious because it's going to influence the choices you make every single day. And we have a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors in our society. So the best way to change that is to change what's going on between the ears. And if you like good books, podcasts, resources, this is my biggest struggle, just personally as a human. Like, this is where I have the hardest time. Is managing all these different aspects of life and stressors, and what goes on up here is really, really important. And if I want to show up and be the handsomest, funniest, most awesome doctor or chiropractor that you guys have ever met, I need to communicate to myself in that way and put the practices in place in order to execute that, versus self-deprecating speak in state of lack and scarcity and all those things. If you guys like that kind of stuff or you want to dive deeper into that, I encourage you to read anything by Joe Dispenza or Bruce Lipton. Joe Dispenza is a doctor. Bruce Lipton's a PhD, MD, DC. He's a doctor 3 times over. They have some really amazing books like The Biology of Belief or The Nocebo Effect or You Are the Placebo. But if you really want to start to understand how your thought processes influence like energetic expression, it's baffling what the research is showing right now on this. They just did a landmark study, the first of its kind, where they did 5,000 real-time functional MRIs. They were in real time watching this person's brain chemistry, and they were chronically ill. Joe Dispenza has built this massive network of people that are really good at doing this. But basically, all these people were like praying, meditating, or like consciously trying to think about healing this person, and in real time, this person's brain like started to rewire and change. like just baffling, crazy stuff that is in the realm of like physics, theoretical physics, things like Tesla and Einstein were talking about back in the day, but it is tangibly being applied in real world health research right now. So if you want to read about that stuff, because I think I don't, I'm more of a mechanics, engineering, structure, function kind of person. So sometimes the theoretical physics stuff, I'm like, that's amazing. How does it all work? Like it's kind of hard to understand all of it, but it's happening in real time right now. But in summary, what you think and your perception has a massive impact on how you show up in the world, and even epigenetic and methylation type expressions inside your body. So as always, our family looks forward to partnering with yours to get to the root cause of your health concerns. Thank you for allowing us to feed into and be a part of your lives. What we really love, and what the highest compliment you can pay us, is trusting us with yourself, but your family, your friends, your loved ones. So if you got a bunch of family, friends, loved ones hanging out that you're like, you guys got to get on board, send them in. We'd love to have them. Also, I love educating. We have, again, 12 different advanced workshops. We have little 10-minute presentations on stress and all sorts of different things. So if there's moms groups, church groups, Boy Scout groups, whatever groups, your place of business, you want us to bring you lunch one day and talk to you guys about stress management, posture, ergonomics, absenteeism, presenteeism, whatever. I'm happy to do that for you. So please, I greatly value and appreciate the opportunity to be a part of your team, and we look forward to continuing to serve you with excellence. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope this was a benefit to you. Please check into your handouts, as I provided the most pertinent data in there to help you with some tangible action steps. But blessings to you all. Have a good night. Woo! You're so welcome.